Fulci, Dakota Mill, Kristen Meyer, Gabrielle Monnier, Maya Smith, Phoebe Brown, Penelope Jones. Beautiful. All right, ladies, let's walk. Gorgeous. Beautiful. Slow down. Graceful. Gorgeous. All right. Stop. Thank you.
Anne?
I'm not 20 anymore.
Shit. You need the name of a surgeon?
No, thanks. I want to be an actress, not a model.
Well, then you're definitely gonna need a surgeon. Call Aphrodite Aesthetic Clinic and ask for Dr. Weil. You can say I sent you. They did my cheekbones.
Nice.
Dakota. Dakota Mill.
Gabrielle Monnier.
Hi.
Hi. She asked me if I would do domestic ads.
What'd you say?
I don't know. What are they?
Soap, detergent, yogurt, phones.
Cool.
Don't change your lips.
Welcome to the Cinematologists podcast. I'm Neil Fox. I am delighted to be back with you so soon after our big Wednesday episode, and thank you to everyone who reached out about that. Yes, it was great to be with Mark and in a cinema and talking movies and screening movies again, and hopefully we'll be back in the new season with some more live events, because it definitely whetted my appetite for doing that again. I do enjoy it, and I really enjoyed that experience, and I really appreciate people's feedback, which is always welcome. So thank you to everyone who reached out and said nice things about that episode. Today's episode is a real honour. There are certain films and filmmakers that just come along and kind of occupy your mind as people who are kind of really cinematic artists and thinkers. And having seen Bertrand Bonello's House of Tolerance, Saint Laurent and Zombie Child, I've just become really kind of excited about the films that he makes. And The Beast, which is out in cinemas this Friday with Léa Seydoux and George Mackay, has been a film that I've really wanted to see since I heard about it at the autumn festivals last year. Those of you who are kind of Patreon subscribers will know very well my kind of interest in Seydoux as an actress, who I just think is one of the great modern film stars and actresses. I think she's phenomenal. So I'm always interested in any film that she's attached to, and for her to be working with Bonello again, and the addition of George Mackay was just really exciting, and the film just looked absolutely fantastic. So when the publicist Chris Lawrence reached out and said, would we like to interview Bonello for the release of The Beast on the podcast, I was absolutely ecstatic and massively honoured. And I have to say there was a real pang of kind of bittersweetness, because Dario's on a break, and I know that this is one that Dario would have loved to have been involved with, and we talked about it, and I appreciate his support for me to go and do it solo. It was kind of daunting to do it solo, particularly because Bonello's a filmmaker that I really admire and whose interviews are always kind of so thought-provoking and engaging. It was kind of a big challenge, and I'm grateful for Dario's support in kind of going off to do it. And huge thanks to Chris Lawrence for trusting us to do something that kind of suited the release of such a remarkable film. And I hope that the conversation has done kind of Chris's faith and Dario's faith justice, and you listeners as well, because you are also massively important. And it was interesting to do the interview in a season where I feel really confident about the conversations that I'm having in terms of what I think are valuable and interesting conversations for the listeners of the podcast, and kind of trying to go about things in a way that I feel really comfortable in and confident in terms of what I'm interested in kind of drawing out of conversations with people. and to have a conversation kind of very short notice with a filmmaker like Bertrand was a real kind of thrill, and a nerve-wracking one. But I really enjoyed the experience. I felt really challenged because I think he's a really intelligent filmmaker, really intelligent person, and a really thoughtful person. So I hope that the experience amongst the whirlwind of kind of interviews he was doing was one that he didn't feel was a waste of his time. The film is not a waste of anyone's time. It repays the investment massively. I think it's a really remarkable piece of work. It's bold and innovative. And it was interesting because we talk in the conversation a little bit about the film Coma, which is a film that he made during the pandemic that hasn't been released here yet, and I hope is out at some point this year. And Bertrand certainly suggested that it was on its way. But after the interview prior to this, I finally saw Nocturama, his film about a kind of terrorist attack in Paris. And there's so much in Nocturama, Zombie Child, and The Beast, which is so engaged with how cinema can really get to the kind of the emotional and ideological complexity of contemporary life and contemporary society, even though in the case of The Zombie Child, part of it is set in the past, and obviously a large part of The Beast is set in the past and the future. Yet he has a kind of innate understanding of what's going on in terms of the emotional turmoil of society in the West particularly, and our kind of uncomfortable relationship with our histories, and how technology coming along is not necessarily going to solve that, certainly in the case of The Beast. So there I am, on record, loving The Beast, and also, really pleased with this conversation. Thank you so much to Chris Lawrence for setting it up, and also thank you to Bertrand for being so generous with his time and his replies. It was a real honour to talk to someone who I think is one of the most interesting filmmakers working today, and someone who is a cinematic person in terms of the way they see their films, the way they see the world. There's a real engagement with cinema as a kind of vital means of expression for what makes life so complicated and hard, but also beautiful. So thank you to him for his time, and thank you for listening, as always. And I really appreciate your continued investment in the podcast. And I hope you enjoy this conversation. This is me with the filmmaker, Bertrand Bonello.
Do you still have the same feeling then?
What did I say? Exactly.
You talked about something you felt when you were very young. Something deep inside of you. A feeling of doom. That a strange, rare and terrible thing would befall you sooner or later. You were convinced that it would eventually strike and obliterate you. And I think that was the actual word you used. Obliterate.
What else did I tell you?
Actually, you said that you didn't want to get involved in a relationship because you were convinced something terrible would befall you and annihilate you. You and those close to you.
It's true. But in any case, to answer your question, nothing happened.
And you got married, nevertheless.
How do you know?
I can see under your glove the shape of a wedding ring.
Of course.
And your husband? Where is he?
I don't know. Yes, I took the risk, but I was young and romantic. And now, all this seems so distant.
Then you told me something would suddenly appear. Like a hidden beast. Destroy everything both in you and around you.
And what did you say?
Nothing. It did frighten me a bit, I remember. But maybe I was just too young.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I haven't stopped thinking about The Beast since I watched it yesterday. and I was talking to a friend who saw it. He lives in Los Angeles, and he saw it the other day, and he said he was perplexed by it. And I said I thought that was a really good word, because I think a lot of your films are kind of deliberately perplexing, in the sense of they encourage you to think about so much stuff. And this is a film which really kind of asks you to think, but also watching it, like watching a lot of your films, it feels like you're making the films as a way of thinking through certain feelings and certain ideas. So I wondered how you feel about your films sort of being seen as maybe perplexing, or making people really kind of think in a variety of different ways at once.
Well, I take it as a compliment, you know. I think I really prefer, as a filmmaker, but also as just a spectator, you know, films that opens much more than film that closes, films that ask questions much more than films that give answers, and film that give you to think, you know, and not that tells you what to think, you know. So, I take it as a compliment.
Great, because I think one of the great pleasures of your work is the ability to think in quite uncomfortable positions. You put the audience in uncomfortable positions in terms of, you know, like the perspective of the characters, like Zombie Child or Nocturama, and here particularly in the kind of the 2014 sequence, but not at the expense of a kind of a pleasure. You know, that the sort of cinematic pleasure is kind of first is as present as any of the ideas that you're working with.
Well, I'm not thinking this way when I do films. It's just the way it happens. But for example, I've been doing like a lot of Q&As with this film, not now touring for more than 6 months, and they are all different. You know, sometimes Q&As are just basically the same. You have the same questions, and I can see that with this film in particular, you have a lot of entry doors, you know, and each spectator or journalist have its own way to talk about the film and to think about the film. So for me, it's a great pleasure. It's something rich, even for me, you know, to receive all these words and these thoughts.
Yeah. You sort of say you've been touring it for 6 months, but I think the film has been with you for quite a long time. I just wondered how long you've been sort of working with the Beast, and apart from obviously the logistical reasons why you made it now, if there was a sense that this was a time where it was right for you to make this film.
Well, it's been a very long process of writing, much longer than the other films. I think I did like almost 30 drafts of script, because I mean, with this kind of concept, you know, it can be like so many things. First version, I know there was 3 periods, like 1910, 1936, and 2014. Then I added the future part, the 2044. It became like a mini-series. Then after, from the mini-series, I split up in 2 separate films, one taking place in 1936 and the one you saw. So it's been like a very, very long process. And at one moment you say, okay, now I have the script. Because it could be so many things, you know, so many things. And it's weird the moment when you say, okay, now I know I have it, you know, it's there is no reasons, it's just your personal feeling. And then so I started writing like 6 or 7 years ago. At one moment I stopped because I was a little lost, and I did Zombie Child, and then I came back to the writing. And then we were ready to shoot, but we had to postpone the film because of Léa Seydoux' schedule. So I had like a year off and I did Coma. And then we went back on the prep. And then Gaspard died. Gaspard Ulliel, who was supposed to be the main male actor. So we stopped again, postponed again. I did some cast and met George Mackay. And so yes, it was a very long process for many reasons.
I did want to ask about the 2 leads. We'll start with George there, because I mean I'm a big fan of George's work, but this is a this is a hell of a role. I mean, it's a really hard thing to do. And I wondered if you'd seen anything of his, or what it was that kind of, was there a moment where you were like, oh, George can do this? Because it asks a lot of an actor.
Yeah, I mean, there are two reasons. I mean, when Gaspar died, I decided not to replace him with a French actor. I needed something different to make the film possible again. It would have been impossible for me and for the French actor, to replace someone. So I started like a very classical casting process with a British and American actor. I met George like maybe after 3 months. I went to London and to do some tests. And well, it was obvious that, his tests were just perfect. I mean, he's an amazing actor, amazing. But beyond this, I could see in him a real intimate understanding of all the challenges of the scenes and of the films. We never really talked about that, but I could feel it. That's something very personal rang in his head, And so for me, it was obvious that he would be perfect for the role. And he made the film possible again for me. And of course, he has. He's an amazing actor, so I knew he could do the 3 parts and all the film, even though it's very difficult. And he's a very hard worker, also, And he couldn't speak a word of French before the shoot, so he learned French. And he's not just acting phonetically; he's really acting in French. And I'm a French person; I can really see that, So the way he's very, very impressive.
Yeah, it's kind of remarkable when he starts speaking in French, just how natural and learned, and I mean that in a kind of, not in a I've learned the lines, but in the embodiment, of a language. It's really striking.
He's acting in French. He's not just repeating French words,
Yeah, but you said somewhere else that one of the many things that the film is about like Léa Seydoux, in terms of like her as an actress, and I wanted to talk about that. But also that for me was a moment where it's like, again, the filmmaking is sort of presenting itself, and you're sort of sharing with the audience the actor George Mackay doing this thing in a way that many actors don't get the chance to do. Like you're presenting the actor George Mackay as well as the character at the same time through this embodiment of the French language.
But one very big challenge for me and for the actors was not to have like 3 characters, but only one, for her and for him. And they do it in a very different way. In a way, Léa is, even if her haircut are changing and stuff like that, but she's basically the same through ages. And George is very different. And I like this contrast between the 2 characters and the way they thought their parts.
Yeah. I wrote a piece recently, last year, about Léa Seydoux, called Léa Seydoux Smoking, which is basically trying to kind of just think about how kind of timeless she is, how like she feels like a very rare film star, like she's a brilliant actress, but she also has this kind of star magnetism, which feels very, very classic.
Because she has a very huge mystery, which is something that disappeared in French cinema anyway. Now most of actresses, and basically all actresses, you need to be to kind of to feel a kind of identification with her, like if she would be like your best friend or your cousin or stuff like that. And it's difficult to have an identification with Léa because she has like the mystery, like ancient stars in a way, But I needed that for the film, This mystery makes, even if like she's in every shot of the film and the film is like 2 hours and 20 minutes, you don't know what's in her mind, even with the camera like 2 inches from her face, she's stronger than the camera in a way.
Yeah. Oh yeah, she's magnificent for that, because I think it's interesting you say about the mystery, because for me I was thinking about the use of AI as an idea, and for me there's this kind of the way you use AI in the story is this, it kind of highlights a gap, which is that, that AI draws from the past and things that have happened and sort of facts. But that's not what life is. Yeah, I read a great quote the other day, which really resonated with the film, which is, you don't remember what happened. What you remember becomes what happened. And that there's this really interesting idea in the film that what the memories are and what the life that was experienced is not what really happened, and how AI is trying to kind of say, well, this is what happened because this is how you remember it. But it's like, well, how I remember it is not what happened. And she's an actress who's able to really tap into this, this sense of there is a gap that AI can never fill, which is the space between what happened and what really happened, a kind of an objective truth of a feeling, of a memory, of how someone experiences something, which is kind of a black hole, because none of us can ever translate those things accurately. It's always just a representation that is presented, and then that is taken as a kind of fact. And I wondered, your thoughts on that, and also, how the film not only sees AI failing and to be able to do that, but AI comes into being because of humanity's failure to really grasp memory, feeling in deep ways.
Well, AI in the film is just represented at the same time as a savior and as a huge danger, as a dictatorship, And I realized, I've never done science fiction before, but I realized making science fiction is like inventing the world of tomorrow. And in fact, you just put in that your fear of today, And I think one of the big fear, not only mine, but is relationship between technology and humanity. Technology is a tool, and human has to be the master of the tool, not the contrary. And now we can see that the technology is the master of humanity, and with AI, it's going to be like 3 steps higher, And we don't even know at what point, which point and which level, but everybody now can really fear the danger. When I started to write the film, a few years ago, I couldn't imagine that last year when I presented the film in Venice and in Toronto, AI would be the heart of so many discussions. Of course, there was a strike in Hollywood, and AI was like the heart of the negotiations. But beside cinema, I could see in every newspapers and magazines, huge articles about the dangers, in terms of ethical, moral, political questions that are not going to be able to be solved, I think,
Yeah.
And of course, it's a huge danger.
AI in the film is also kind of a reminder that these are not new concerns. I think what's really interesting is that the 1910 sequence has a lot of what might be seen as kind of climate worry, like the sort of the impending floods and the rain, these concerns about what is going to happen to our environment. And then I thought it was really fascinating that you chose to put the kind of the recent past in sort of 2014, because it was a time where technology has already impacted the ability for people to have meaningful relationships.
Because in 2014, what you see is Léa Seydoux alone with her computer and George Mackay alone with his iPhone. They're over-connected, but they're so lonely,
Yeah.
It's probably it's one of the subject of the film is loneliness, And in 2014, they're so lonely, and it's already like a relationship between technology and humanity. And then it's a steps further with the future in 2044 and AI. But of course, this loneliness, technological loneliness, we see it around us every day.
Yeah. It's interesting that I noticed on your Sight and Sound list that you picked Eyes Wide Shut as one of your favorite films, because there's a sense of the loneliness that film kind of really taps into around sort of contemporary relationships, which is pre-internet and social media, but certainly, you know, I was reminded of that in terms of these characters who, when they meet face to face, can never connect. You know, it's a kind of impossibility of connection, which speaks very much in terms of the contemporary moment and our ability to have human relationships, but also why giving that responsibility over to AI just feels really huge and terrifying.
Yeah, I watch it. It's one of the greatest films about couple. It's really, if you think about it, it's a story about two husband and wife are trying to cheat on each other, or wishing to cheat on each other, and they just cannot. You know, it's an incredible story.
And it leads me to something that I was kind of wanted to ask about, kind of the film and its filmmaking, and your sort of how you present filmmaking and then sort of cinema throughout. There's this, I've been obsessed with this Kent Jones quote for a couple of years, which he wrote after Godard died, which he said that cinema's point of origin and ultimate destination, like all the arts, is always itself. You know, like, and you open the film by with yourself essentially directing Leia, and there is so much dialogue in the film. You know, that you've said that the film is about something is going to happen. You know, that kind of dread, which feels very
This is the main sentence of the book of Henry James. You know, something is going to happen. A catastrophe is going to happen. And it's fantastic in this novel because you don't know what it is, but you're expecting it. The readers, the characters. And if you have a sentence like that in a film, I mean, everything can happen. It's this short novel, A Beast in the Jungle, is just genius. And there is so much unseen, you know. You have these two characters, but so much unseen. So it's great for the movies too, you know.
Yeah, and that idea feels very, very Lynchian, you know, that kind of idea, like that building of dread which David Lynch does kind of, you know, beautifully. And I noticed, I thought there was a little nod towards Twin Peaks: The Return in the credits with the woman on the screen saying, "Don't go into room 241." But it's also throughout. There's, you know, it reminded me of Under the Skin and Sunrise, you know, which is another film you love. But almost like there's no, it's not derivative. You're not, you know, you're kind of in dialogue with cinema as a means of exploring dread. It means as exploring, you know, these big ideas and reminding audiences that the watching of the film as a way of doing this is as important as it's more important than the story, or it's as important as the story. Like the form is kind of central. And I just wondered, if you could
start to write if I don't have the form of the film. You know, it's not the subject, it's not the story, it's not the characters. It's something that comes together. You know, it's the way to tell the story. Yeah, that's for me the most important thing.
Yeah, it does seem like narrative, that kind of the how of doing it is so key to you. I watched Rouge, the film that you were in, which is really interesting in terms of the idea in that about monstrosity and the idea of this of a beast, you know, and kind of finding it. And I've read that you often have images at the start, you know, sort of create a mood board when you're writing. And I wonder if you had what were the images that kind of were present when you started thinking about the beast in terms of its kind of
Well, in fact, I try not to separate things. I mean, not to have like the writing, the prep, the directing, editing, the music, you know, and to think everything at the same time, if I can. And I always say, you must not write a script, you must write a film. So I have my computer opened, and this is where I write the script. I have a notebook, it's where I write like images or stuff like that, or I'm always picking up images on the net. And I have my music studio in the next room, and everything is working together, you know. So I pick up images. It could be like paintings, pictures. I have a lot of sites with a lot of images, and I put them at the same time in a file, you know. And I start to exchange very early with my DP, and later on with the set decorator and the costume designer, and it could be like colors, shapes, everything.
Yeah, it's fantastic, and the music was something I wanted to ask about as well. Particularly the years. I love the idea in the film of going to a club that just plays music from one year. But I was thinking about how music works in your films, the music you compose, but also the music that you select.
It's something I pick up very, very early. It's during the writing session. For example, in my script, you always have like beginning of the music, end of the music. It's very precise when it starts, when it ends. And if I have a scene in a club, for me, the scene is not finished writing if I do not have the good music, the perfect music. It doesn't mean it's a music I like, but it has to say something about either a character, either a story. And I really think music must not be an illustration or illustrative. It has to be narrative, like a dialogue, like a description. That's why I put them in the script, because they are part of the script.
And I was thinking about how certain music kind of captures the tone or tenor of a certain year, and how, it's not just the fact that it's music from 1963, it's music that captures 1963 as a kind of feeling. And I think it works really beautifully in the 1980 sequence, with Fade to Grey, which is just, it is that kind of post-punk new wave alienation summed up at a time where, when we look back on it now, it was particularly in like America. And
one song is from 1972 where we wanted something like very warm, people dancing together, something very warm. Then 1980, people start to dance like alone. It's very cold and it's blue and gray. And 1963 is because I wanted this Roy Orbison song because of the lyrics, that really, in fact, really tells the film.
And it's nice that George's character is wearing a kind of a suit that you would associate with the young Beatles as well.
Yeah.
To kind of that sense of hope and optimism, that was around there in terms of, sort of culture in the early, sort of that's growing in the early 60s, I think is beautifully captured in the music and the costumes. Oh yeah, that was it. One of the things I wanted to ask about was this sense of disaster. A couple of questions about time, really, because obviously the film is not set now, as in 2023, 24, but there's a kind of preoccupation with disaster. Several times characters say, "Oh, maybe the disaster has already happened. Disasters live in the past," and it feels like a film that's speaking to now in terms of our cultural preoccupation with disaster, kind of the looming disaster, recent disasters, just through sort of social media and sort of, what has become news media. It feels like it's a very, very now thing that there's a kind of almost a kind of unbearable engagement with disasters.
We are surrounded by disasters, and more and more. I mean, and I really wanted that in every period. You have like an intimate catastrophe and a collective catastrophe in the three periods. And the idea of disasters is, and the film is talking about fear in love, and the disaster is something that I think there are two kinds of fears. One, which is a good fear that makes you feel alive, like really like an animal, watching everything, being very sensitive to the world and stuff like that. And one fear that paralyzes you. And the one we really do have in a collective way is very like it's something that stops you from moving, because every day, every hour, you have the idea of disaster, coming from media a lot.
Yeah.
But it's something very, very strong, and that makes us so fragile.
Yeah. That also feels like that's something that you've been spending a lot of time with in your films, in terms of, thinking of things like in recent years, like Nocturama, Zombie Child, be they sort of collective, historical, or kind of contemporary, it seems to be something that you're kind of working through a lot in terms of your own relationship to this idea.
I think I'm very interested in how my characters try to live and to get some freedom, or to talk about freedom, or the lack of freedom in the world in a political way. So Zombie Child is very much about the relationship of France and Haiti and colonialism and stuff like that. And Nocturama, it's very contemporary. It's just people that are can't stand it anymore. They don't know why, but they have to explode. They have to. I remember when I wrote this film, like in 2011, I wanted to write something very contemporary. I was preparing like a House of Tolerance, and I really wanted to go back to contemporary after that. And my idea of the contemporary is something that's so tense that it would explode. It's just the image I had in mind.
Yeah. I mean, I think that is absolutely fascinating, because again, you're seeking to put us in the position of complex characters, these kind of almost symbolic figureheads in terms of, what we see as not the way to necessarily behave, in terms of like, the actions of the people in Nocturama, or the kind of the white girls at the boarding school, or Louis' kind of 2014 character here. But and I know that that's been something that people have said is like, oh, isn't it just trying to get empathy for these kind of people who do bad things? But it feels like it's more about, like, how does anybody survive in this tense environment? And also, it's not about kind of forgiving them, or kind of abdicating them of their actions, but it's about trying to understand those kind of fundamental human things, which again speaks to why the counterpoint with AI is so interesting in terms of what is it to be a human being.
Some people really reproached me in Nocturama that there are no explanations, and I mean, for me, it was useless. I prefer to do a behavior film than a psychological film, and to treat it as an action movie in a way than like a film with a lot of dialogues and people saying comments about the world. But I mean, if you read the paper, if you go in the streets, if you go in the metro, I mean, you don't need explanations to see why people just want to put some bombs. It's just, why don't they put more bombs?
Yeah, for sure. You mentioned earlier that it's your first science fiction film, but the one of the kind of the classic sort of preoccupations or engagements of science fiction is time, and I was thinking that there was a lovely quote about House of Tolerance actually by a writer, which said that the film is engaged with the possibilities afforded by the slippery subjectivity of cinematic time so directly and with such intelligence. And I thought that's a lovely quote about that film, but it's also arguably about most of your work is engaged with that idea of time, and its slipperiness, and how the past and the present collide in kind of all the time. And I just wondered, have you sort of found yourself kind of really thinking, because you talked about the form and the structure, and I was thinking, like, when does how you're going to engage with time come into it? Because it seems that there's always an engagement with time that you're using cinematic.
La Polonie, the House of Tolerance, is the first film in which I really, in the writing, played with time. And then, of course, Saint Laurent, Nocturama, Zombie Child, the two periods, Coma, and of course, The Beast, the most. Because, I mean, the two things about mise en scène, about directing, and it's time and space in a way,
Yeah.
And playing with time, losing the sense of time is part of. I like films to be like a trip, for the one who sees them, and distorting time is part of the trip.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also part of the pleasure as well. The pleasure of the trip, that there's a real warmth to a lot of the filmmaking in terms of, there's a sensuality to it. There's an aesthetic pleasure in the filmmaking, which kind of means that it's never about like the politics that are kind of, all was sort of inherent in the sort of the subtext. It's about kind of going on a journey with those characters. And you mentioned in terms of this film, an interest in melodrama, sort of science fiction and melodrama, which weirdly made me think of Solaris in terms of that combination. But also, I wondered what your relationship is to genre when you're kind of making a film, because you have sort of engaged with genre, but it's never straightforward. It's always,
never straightforward. I mean, I sometimes hesitate, should I make like a pure straight genre movie? And I prefer to include genre in a classical movie. I think it's more me, but for example, in The Beast, you have, of course, you have melodrama and science fiction, but you have also a part which is a kind of slasher. And I like the idea to put some melodrama in the slasher, to put some fear in the melodrama, and that genres really like contaminates each other.
Yeah. At the same time that the time is doing that as well, so it feels everything feels really fluid in terms of when things are happening, but also how things are happening in terms of the form, which keeps it really unstable. But I think in a kind of productive way. I don't mean that in a negative way, in a sense of the audience never knows where and how to feel about something, because there's a lot going on that's kind of moving them through the story in interesting ways.
It's something I really, really worked hard on the writing, how to surprise all the time, how to be pop with some deep stuff. For example, I mean, the film you saw is exactly the film I wrote. There's nothing about structure that we found in the editing room. It's a very precise writing, and the idea that sometimes you're a little lost because the character is lost. You're with her, and there are two ways of being lost. With one which is very interesting, and one which is you lose the film. So that's why it took me like 30 drafts. It was very precise and almost like mathematical.
Yeah. I was saying to Chris before, there was such pleasure in watching the film, because it's quite rare that you watch a film where you're like, this person knows how to make a film. This person understands cinema, and that you sort of captured something there in terms of, we feel lost with the character. We don't feel lost with the film, and that really taps us into that loneliness and isolation.
I really wanted the spectator to be like with her, So of course sometimes she's a little lost. So the person watching the film is also, but I really try that it's not the film that is losing you.
Yeah, no. The film is the film feels beautifully constructed to do what it sets out to do, and anything that's kind of perplexing about it is how you feel about it, not what's going on, which I think is again quite rare. That engagement with complex feelings. I think that cinema has become a space for simple, didactic and very narrow feelings, where this film, probably more than any of your others, kind of really makes you engage with a lot of difficult, complex feelings throughout, which is a really kind of emotionally unsettling but kind of really rewarding experience, I think.
Yeah, I think the film is like, someone told me in New York that it's this film is like the addition of all my films. It's a kind of some film sum, and it's probably the end of a cycle.
Yeah,
I have to go really somewhere else now.
Cool. Well, I look forward to that. I just got a couple of questions to round up on. One is quite a big one. I read a piece about I think it was around about the time of Zombie Child by Scout Tafoya, which says, in terms of your work, that culture cannot be blown up or reasoned away. It's embedded deeper than our taste and perceptions. And that, again, sort of goes back to this idea that AI cannot understand us, mainly because we don't understand ourselves. And I wondered, how you feel about the future in terms of what we're giving away to not just AI, but to kind of to technology more broadly?
I don't feel safe. I think technology is not an aim. It has to stay the tool, and it's really, really changing. I mean, it depends what you do with the tool. If you have a hammer, you can put like a painting on the wall, but you can also hit someone and kill him.
Yeah.
And it's exactly the same. How is it going to be used? And of course, I don't feel optimistic at all. Yeah.
I'm optimistic that Coma will be making a UK appearance at any point soon. Is there a plan for Coma to come out here?
It's coming like in 2 weeks in the US, and I hope we'll find something in the UK. It's sometimes it takes some time.
Yeah, for sure. But I'm excited to see it, especially if this is part of this cycle, which is coming to an end. But I absolutely am really excited to see what you do next. So thank you so much for your time today and for engaging with such a fantastic. Thank you. Have a great day.
You too. Bye, Neil.